Constant of proportionality graph review. The graph shows a proportional relationship between the distance and the amount of time Mr. Brown drives. What does each of these points represent in the situation? 0, 0, 155, and 5, 275. Now, if you take a look at the graph, the title is Mr. Brown's road trip. So we know Mr. Brown took a road trip, and now we also have to read the X and Y axis labels. What is the X axis discussing? Well, the title for the X axis is time with the letter H, which means time is represented in hours. What is our Y axis or all of our Y coordinates discussing? Well, the Y axis is labeled as distance with the label MI, and MI stands for miles. So we will be looking at how many hours Mr. Brown drives and what is his total distance in miles. And remember, when we look at an ordered pair, it's always X, then Y, and you can remember that similar to the alphabet. So when we look at 0, 0, which is also known as our origin, X is discussing hours. So for 0 hours, Mr. Brown drives a total of 0 miles. There are multiple ways that you can say the same information, such as Mr. Brown drives 0 miles in 0 hours. As long as you keep your X with hours and your Y with miles, it doesn't matter the order in which it's presented. Now let's take a look at the second ordered pair, 155. 1 is discussing hours, 55 miles. So when Mr. Brown drives for 1 hour, he goes a total of 55 miles. You could also rewrite that as Mr. Brown drives 55 miles in 1 hour. Now, this piece of information is the most unique. Whenever you have an X value of 1, that's talking about your unit rate. So for every 1 hour, we know Mr. Brown goes 55 miles, which is the same as 55 miles per hour. That is really important regarding our constant of proportionality because 55 miles per hour is our constant rate of change. We know that after every hour, he goes an additional 55 miles. And we're actually going to explore that a little bit further in Part B. Can you let me know what 5, 275 can represent in this situation? Well, I know that 5 is X or hours. So after 5 hours, Mr. Brown drives 275 miles, which is the same as Mr. Brown drives 275 miles in 5 hours. Now we are going to explore what is our constant of proportionality a little bit further. And yesterday we explored that our constant of proportionality is that unit rate. So would it make sense to write it as hours per mile or miles per hour? Well, we know that the miles depends on hours, and to find the unit rate, we're going to represent all of our relationships as miles per hour, or miles is in the numerator, and hours are in the denominator. Miles, the amount of distance that Mr. Brown travels, depends on the hours he drives. So since it's depends, that is called our dependent, and hours, time can keep passing, and the hours does not depend on miles, so that is called your independent. We know our miles is associated with all of our Y coordinates, and all of our time is associated with our X coordinates. And this ratio of y to x is probably the most important piece of this lesson, because in order to find our constant of proportionality, which can be represented with the variable k, we're going to take our y values and divide them by x. So our first piece of information besides the origin, our y coordinate is 55, our x coordinate is 1, and just like when we were looking at our unit rate yesterday, we would divide 55 by 1. So remember, when we're looking for our constant of proportionality, we are computing y divided by x. So with this ordered pair, 1, 55, we would calculate the constant of proportionality as 55 divided by 1. And we know 55 divided by 1 is 55. The other ordered pair, besides the origin and 1, 55, is 5, 275. Which is our x coordinate and which is our y coordinate? Because we need to divide y divided by x using this piece of information. When we perform the division, we are going to take the y value, which is 275, and divide it by 5. 275 divided by 5 is equal to 55. And what we see here is a constant of proportionality, or a constant rate of change of 55. And this means that it's 55 is happening over and over again. And we already knew this would happen because Mr. Brown drives 55 miles per hour. So in order to find our constant of proportionality, given a graph, we are going to take pieces of information and take their y value and divide it by x.